So I keep all my references in a tool called Zotero. Zotero is both a database in the cloud and a database on my computer. So in other words, it has a web application and it has a desktop application, and their databases are synced. So if I make a change in one, it gets updated in the other. Now, whenever I'm surfing the web and I find something relevant to one of my classes or research projects, I use a Chrome add-in to save the reference to my Zotero library. This plugin reads meta information from the web page, and it fills in fields in a bibliographic record. So the publisher, the date, the author, title, and so on. And then I can specify what sublibrary I want to store it in, and I can tag the entry with keywords. So later, if I'm writing a paper or writing a lecture and I'm doing it in Word or Google Docs, I can put a reference in that will draw from that library. And then later I can create a bibliography and it'll all be properly formatted. If I need to make that bibliography in a different format for some reason, it's as easy as pie, just to push a button. So that's the functionality that Zotero itself offers me. But what I'd really like to do is be able to put bibliography into a Quercus page or slide in a slide deck. And I'd like that to be a specific bibliography, so I can say, find me just the entries that have something to do with how you do regular expressions in Microsoft Word. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to write my own application program that makes use of the Zotero database. And fortunately for that, Zotero offers an API, so I can create a program that does what I want. My program is going to talk to Zotero. Okay. The first step is I have to learn something about the API. And so what I do there is I Google Zotero API and find a web page that tells me all about how the API works. Now it takes some reading, it takes a little while to learn about how to read one of these things and how to figure out what you need to know. And in this case, what I want to know is I want to know how to ask Zotero's API for references that are in my library and that bear a certain tag. And so I scan through the documentation trying to find how I do that. And the simple version is going to be to formulate a URL, and the URL is going to say Zotero API / and then a number of things between slashes that are going to be kind of commands and information to the API. And then finally, there'll be some parameters at the end where I'll say question mark, and then the name of the parameter and an equals sign and a value. And so in this case, it's going to be question mark tag equals something. And let's see what happens. And we can see that what I get is a lot of JSON. Now we can actually learn something about the format that this data comes in if we take a look at this JSON, look more closely at it. What we see is that the data is coming back to us, in this case, with an array of 4 elements, so 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that each of those elements, when we look more closely, is a JSON object, curly brackets, and it's got 6 components inside, and one of those components is the thing that contains the bibliographic data that we are interested in. So how do I implement this in JavaScript? How do I get JavaScript to take advantage of this? So let's take a look. First thing I'm going to do is be committed to top-down design, and I'm going to keep things super, super simple. I'm going to create a web page that's got a div on it, a div element, and I'm going to give that div a name. And my goal is going to be to grab the data and stick it in this div and not do any fancy formatting. And further, to keep things simple, I'm going to hard code. This means I'm going to type the actual value into the code rather than giving the user an opportunity for giving some input. So I'm going to hard code the URL that contains those instructions. So the same URL that I used up there before. Now, I should note that we're going to use a function here that's provided by p5.js, which I mentioned in a previous video, and which CodeTrain had in their video. That function is called loadJSON. And it's a wonderful function that hides a whole bunch of stuff from us, right? So we're doing that abstraction and encapsulation thing. And all I need to specify is the URL and the name of a function that we're going to give the data that we get back to. So it's going to say load JSON, then we're going to send it a URL, and then let's call that function getData. This is new. It's called a callback function. A callback function is used when we talk to an API because we never know how long the API is going to take to deliver the data that we asked for. So we can't have our program just kind of go on its merry way and do other things, because the other things that the program wants to do depend on the data having come back from the API, but we don't know how long that's going to take. So we can't just say, send the request to the API and then wait 30 seconds or wait 10 seconds or wait 2 milliseconds. We don't know how long it's going to take. So what we do is what we call an asynchronous call of this function. So the callback function is asynchronous, which means that it doesn't start just because it's the next line in the program. It starts when a particular event happens. In this case, the event is the API has returned some data. So here's what this callback function does if we take a look at it here. So first it says how long is the return data, right? So when it does that, because remember the data is an array, so we can access the length property, and this tells us how many chunks of data has the API sent to us. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have our main logic be one that just loops over that array and processes each chunk of data. And we're going to grab the bibliographic information, put some HTML tags around it, take that string and stick it into an output string, which once we're done, we've gone through the 4 times, we will then stick that into the inner HTML of our div on our web page, and it's going to work just like this. To use P5 inside of CodePen, I need to tell CodePen where to find that library. And so I go to the search box, just start typing P5, it knows about it. We click here, and it puts in the URL that allows CodePen to download the library P5 and give us access to all the functionality in P5. First thing I'm going to do is do that hard coding of my URL, and then every P5 program starts out with a function called setup. And setup normally creates a canvas on which the drawing and visualization will happen, but we're not doing any visualization, so we're going to use a function called noCanvas. And then we're going to put our load.json function in here, and we have to give it 2 parameters, the URL, the variable we just defined above, and the name of our callback function, getData. So let's take a look at our callback function. We call it getData, and it has one parameter. We call that parameter data. That's the name we'll give to the object we get from the API. And we remember that that object is an array. Its contents are an array. And so what we're going to do is we're going to loop, we're going to iterate over that array. And we're going to use the fact that it's an array to set our iteration variable's limit as data.length. So I is the iteration variable. It goes from 0 up to data.length, and we'll increment it as we go along. And then what are we going to do? We're basically going to access each element of this array. I want to grab a piece of it, so I want to create a variable. I'm going to call it output. It's an empty string. That's where I'm going to put the stuff that I grabbed from the data. Which for the first refinement, let's just do the title. So if we look back at the JSON, we'll see that it's got an element inside called data. So we would actually refer to that as data.data. So data of I. So the ith element, and then the component of that we're going to look at will be the data component. And then if we look at the JSON inside of that, there's another component called title. So our expression here will be output is going to equal, and then I'm going to stick some HTML in here because I want to wrap these things. I want to make a list. So I put the li tag, and then it's data of I dot data dot title. And that's going to grab the title of each work in my bibliography. And then I finish it up with another little bit of text, which is the closing li tag. Now that's going to pick up each of the elements of the data that was returned from the API. I'm concatenating them together as some HTML, but now what I want to do is I want to finish the HTML. I need to put the OL, the ordered list tag, on the outside ends of this li stuff. So output equals, in this case, the OL tag plus the stuff I just generated above in the loop, plus the closing li tag, OL tag, so the end of the ordered list. This is then going to be the HTML that I'm going to drop in my div. And so I do document.getElementById. The name of that div over there is bibliography. And I want to set its inner HTML property to the text that I just generated. Takes a moment for the API to respond, and then we have our bibliography.